Today's March 2nd, 2019, and this is episode 60 of Plane Savers. Hey guys, it is Saturday, and the Saturday episodes are always a little bit different. So today I decided to call up my buddy Steve, aka FlightChops, and put him down for an interview with Skype. So I'm just working on that right now. And yeah, I'm going to call him up, videotape the recording of us talking. I got some questions about him, about his Harvard. So, you know, this week I've been featuring some Harvard stories. I want to put a bookend to the week with Steve and his Harvard stories. So let's just dive into it and call him up on Skype and see what he's got to say.
Yo.
Hi, Steve. How's it going?
It's good, man. Cold, crisp winter day, probably what you're used to.
So actually flying in this cold weather, that's probably pretty rare for people that are doing like Harvard and T6 training outside of Canada, eh?
That's true, yeah. So in Canada, the Harvard, the easy way you can quickly tell the difference between a Harvard and a T6 is the exhaust stack on the Harvard is the long one that goes right along the entire wing. That's because the cabin heat is sort of like a tube on the inside of that exhaust shroud. That's how you get your cabin heat. And also we take the gear doors off. So, you know, when the gear comes down on the T6, you can see a little piece of metal, like a little flap that's just off because the snow was binding up in the struts. So pretty much every Harvard has the gear door flaps or whatever they're called removed. And you can tell with the long exhaust. So you can instantly tell the difference. Otherwise, it's the same as a T6.
Okay, so actually, like the reason I wanted to call you and talk to you is that, of course, a lot of viewers that are on Plane Savers, of course, a lot of them are your viewers too. But the one thing I want to hit on is like your three Harvard series videos from, you know, the initial idea of going to Harvard, the training, and then the final solo flight. But before that, when you're doing your flight training, what was going through your head that maybe one day you'd want to fly a Warbird? Basically, what is the draw from general aviation to Warbirds?
I don't know how typical my story is, but my grandfather flew Spitfires. So for me as a kid, that the Spitfire represented to me the pinnacle of aviation. It's just a beautiful airplane. It's like, I think Warbirds, the World War II era kind of was the pinnacle of human flight, in my opinion, just because the airplanes got to the point where the performance and the airplane performance and the human performance were both maxed out. You needed both elements of the puzzle. With fighter jets and everything else, the human became a liability. Like the jet can easily outperform the human, and in a lot of ways it's just a liability to be on board. So I felt like fighters in World War II really got to that place where it's just, you know, the airplane needs you. It does nothing for you. It's all manual. I mean, it's like giant levers and knobs and hydraulic systems, and it's just super antiquated stuff, but it's amazing technology for what it could do. Like the performance, I mean, these things could go 400 miles an hour. You know what I mean? They could pull 6+ Gs. I mean, these things were amazing flying machines. So to me, that was the pinnacle of human flight, and that's what I always aspired to fly. So to me, a Cessna was a stepping stone towards that kind of thing. I just never knew how I would get there. So it was a 20-year journey for me because I started flying in the 90s, just slowly figuring out how to get there.
Oh, that's amazing. So how would you explain to somebody that was in the position you were with the Cessna? How would somebody go, okay, you know what, I want to fly a Warbird. What's their next step?
The very first step is you have to get your tailwheel endorsement. There's no way around it. That's what you got to do. What's interesting is I talk to a lot of guys who fly high performance nose wheel airplanes like Moonies or Bonanzas or whatever, and they don't even, some of them get it, but a lot of them feel like, why would I ever want a tailwheel? Like, my airplane doesn't have a tailwheel. I'm never going to fly a tailwheel. But it makes you a better pilot in so many ways because you really have to use your feet. You really have to understand what that rudder does. The fundamental difference between a tailwheel and a nose wheel airplane is the location of the center of gravity related to the main gear. And essentially, a tailwheel airplane really wants to ground loop on you. So the takeoff and landing, mostly landing, if you don't have it aligned really well, and if you allow yourself to have any side load when you touch down, it's instantly going to want to swerve on you, and the tail's going to want to pass you. And if you're not on top of it, you'll ground loop. In a nose wheel airplane, you can get away with a lot of side load problems because the center of gravity is forward of the main gear, so it'll end up sort of working out that you'll go in the direction you're heading. It won't be pretty, but you can get away with it. And tailwheel makes you a better pilot all around. So I recommend any pilot get their tailwheel, but if you want to fly Warbirds, you have to get your tailwheel.
Sounds good. Well, what about what about the physical act of going, hey, okay, I got my tail wheel rating now. What does the person do? Where do they go? What resources are available?
Yeah, so that's a challenge. I mean, that was a 20-year journey for me to figure it out. I got to admit, I didn't think it was possible for the longest time. I also kind of believed that you had to have tens of thousands of hours and be like an airline guy that, you know, to get access to these priceless warbirds. And some organizations do have pretty high barrier limitations in terms of minimum hours. But there's a flip side to that. And, you know, an airline captain that's been flying 737s for 10 years maybe don't have happy feet, you know what I mean? Like what you need for warbirds. So some of the guys that I've trained or trained with really believe that they want to take someone that's newer, that doesn't have bad habits yet. And I mean, at the end of the day, in World War II, I mean, they were throwing 18-year-olds in these airplanes. Now, they were crashing a lot. Like I think in the base that the chief pilot of the organization I'm with, at his base just after World War II, he was a training pilot in the Harvard. He said there was a time when they tried to use the Harvard as a primary trainer, and they were having a ground loop a week. But the airplanes were a dime a dozen, and most of the time it's just an embarrassing, expensive accident. So they were just cranking them through. We don't want to have ground loops at all in these airplanes now. So it's how much experience do you need before you get in one? It's debatable. But really what it comes down to is if you got happy feet and you've got your tail wheel and you're really keen to learn it, it's not insurmountable. But you need to find an organization that'll accept you. That's a bit of a challenge. I got lucky with the CH-2A where I'm at. They don't have a huge barrier for entry, and they'll train you and sign you off if you can do it.
Wow, that's good. So now you've got your Tailwheel endorsement. You found a place. They're lucky enough to accept you. Now it's you. You have to go inside, open the door, go into this facility. What's going through your head when you first see the aircraft? Not from an air show point of view, but from a point of view that you're now going to sit in that aircraft. What's going through your head?
Well, I mean, so the Harvard is a pretty T6. It's got a reputation. It's a 6,000-pound airplane, and there's a lot of people talk about it as being the pilot maker. It's a very challenging airplane, and if you lose control even slightly on the rollout, you're pretty much going to ground loop. So you really don't. There's not a lot of window there to lose it. You have to be on top of it. And also, the guy that I was training with, kind of jokingly, not jokingly, said to me, "I can't really save you from the back seat. So if you really screw it up, we're going for a ride." Meaning, like, when I'm in the front seat and I'm flying, I'm being trained, he's kind of talking me through what I have to do. But when it comes down to it, whoever's landing the airplane is landing the airplane. If the other guy suddenly has to take it from the back seat, it's probably too late. So I went into it knowing he's going to tell me what to do and tell me if I'm too high or tell me too fast and, you know, help me fix it before it becomes a problem. But if at the end of the day, when a problem happens on a landing roll in a great big tailwheel airplane, it happens fast. You lose control slightly. You get a little bit of a oscillation going on the roll, and if you get behind it, it starts to get into a positive feedback loop, and then you're quickly just like out of control. And you know, you can try to stomp on the brake and try to pick up that one side and get back in control, but it's a very small window. Once it starts to swing, you can't get it back, and you're going off the runway. So I was very conscious of that.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. Now, also, you're going through all the stuff, all the emotions, everything, and you're filming it. Now, what's going through your head, too, now, actually doing two jobs at once? Did that come into play at all?
I think there's a piece that I left in the first training mission where I kind of checked the cameras, and I said something to my training pilot to say, "Is that one rolling that's blinking, looking at you?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, that's the last time I'm thinking about this." So whenever I am filming a flight, GoPros and those set it and forget it cameras have always fundamentally been a debriefing tool for me, so I really try not to think about them when I'm flying. I think that's an important thing to say to any pilot that wants to use cameras. They're a great debriefing tool, horrible selfie tool. Do not go flying to take selfies. So no, I don't think about it. Once I'm going, if I happen to notice a red light is no longer blinking once we're flying, it's like, oh, well, I guess the battery's dead. I don't know, whatever. I'm not going to even consider thinking about it. I'm too busy. It's, oh, well, you know. So yeah, I can't let it distract me.
Yeah, I guess that would be a hard thing to go through. For a lot of people, especially if people like you weren't, I'm making an assumption, you weren't motivated to fly the Harvard from YouTube. You decided to use YouTube to show your experience, correct?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to fly Warbirds, so it just became I was already doing FlightChops, and I actually showed my tailwheel training right from zero in a Super Cub. So I had already been doing the channel for a long time before I had the opportunity to fly the Harvard. So it was a natural progression to share that process.
So there might be kids out there, like if you're 13, 14 right now, you're growing up on YouTube. There might be, like you said, there might be a problem for another generation coming up that might be too concerned about selfies, and we've seen instances in the news about that kind of stuff. So that's a good lesson to teach these kids is, leave Instagram at home and focus on the airplane, which would be was never a concern. I remember my father talking quite a bit about the pilots concerned too much with the GPS, like in flight. He didn't want to even, like, why do you even have this thing? Now he's got 3 GPSs, but it's it's another hard thing that, the original Harvard pilots would have had no concern on GoPros.
No, they had enough to worry about with trying to navigate with no technology. It's interesting, though, because we still have all the original instruments in that airplane, but I'm using ForFlight on an iPad to navigate, and, I mean, that's my portable avionics. It's amazing to have this modern technology strapped to my leg in an airplane from the 40s, because I just can't imagine the stress of trying to – because they flew IFR in these airplanes. So it's possible.
Are you sponsored by ForFlight?
I am, yeah, but I've been using it since way before I was sponsored. So to me, that was what got me back. Actually, there was a period of time where I wasn't current when we bought our house and had a baby, and all those things happened, and suddenly 4 years had gone by between like 2005 and 2009. I wasn't current, wasn't flying. Between 2005 and 2009, a couple major things happened. One of which was the iPad and ForFlight. I never liked paper charts. I always found it super frustrating to try to work with paper charts and unfold them and figure out where the heck you were and use a pencil and try to, So I bought ForFlight and my wife got me an iPad for Christmas in 2009, and I got ForFlight and started getting back into recurrency, and it was just so amazing to like have this amazingly powerful tool, and you can back it up on your phone and have multiple installs. So it's not like if your battery dies, you're dead in the water. Always want to have a backup, but I mean, it's just the situational awareness was so much better. It's just been amazing to have that kind of technology. It's better than a panel mounted GPS as far as I'm concerned in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's funny. My father, as old school as he was, and I still remember him complaining about the GPS routing pilots, and this would have been like 1998 and stuff like that. So he should be one of the last people to endorse new technology, but he really likes ForFlight, and of course I'm not even sponsored by ForFlight, but it all started, we bought a King Air, and we hired a pilot, like a regular King Air pilot, to bring it in. He was using ForFlight, and it just blew my father away. So he's got this like Generation 1 iPad that he uses with
still running?
And he's got ForFlight on it, just basically running like a steam engine. But he really likes it, which is kind of cool. But okay, so now you're in the airplane, you're flying, you've done your solo, your everything. You're in the airplane. What's it like? What's going through your head being one with this airplane? Sun's going down, a whole 9 yards. What's going through your head in that moment?
Like on the first solo, you mean?
No, I mean just like
in general.
After all the mass in your head, all the hard stuff. What's going through your head when it's yourself flying the airplane?
Well, so I literally was flying it yesterday, and at this point, it's maintaining proficiency. Right, it's a big beast of an airplane, but I am starting to feel like I'm friends with that airplane, and it's really feeling comfortable and muscle memory. I know where to reach for things. I don't have to look for things. So yesterday I probably went and banged out 10 landings in a beautiful, crisp winter day, and it's just an honor to be flying the thing, and it sounds amazing, and it smells, so visceral, you're around DC-3s, what the round engines smell like. It's just a real honor to be flying it and feeling like I'm not as afraid of it as I was. I'm still very respectful. I think I'm just nearing 100. I think yesterday I did my 90th solo landing. So I'm close to 100 landings in it in the past, whatever it's been, less than a year since I got checked out. So I'm really trying to really own it and be one with that airplane and respect it and maintain proficiency in it. But the first solo, I said it to myself over the intercom. It's a hilarious soundbite that I use where I said something like, now you've gone and done it. You got to get this airplane on the ground by yourself. Because it occurred to me very viscerally when I first put the gear up after my first takeoff, and I was like, oh yeah, there's nobody here to save me now. So it definitely felt like a first solo flying that airplane.
What's it like now, living the moment, recording the moment, and then now going back home? You're in a dark room. You upload the footage. Now you got to edit it. What's going through your head, reliving it in that form? Actually seeing, yourself as almost a character.
Right.
Did you notice anything?
Yeah, well, this is why I started the whole thing, really. It was all about debriefing and looking at footage of a flight. Because what it comes down to is I used to make notes about flights after the flight to remember in detail more than just a single log entry, but those notes can only ever be based on what you can remember. There's nothing like listening to the intercom live and looking at the footage of actually what was happening in real time. There's been, cases where you're dealing with ATC or something and they seemed a little cranky. It's like, wow, why was the controller cranky? And you look back at the recording, you're like, because it was the third time he tried to call me. So my passenger was talking, I didn't hear him the first 2 times, so he's pissed off by the time and I finally hear him. I'm like, what was your problem? I would not have known that unless I look back at the recording and like, oh, that's why he was mad. Just things like that. Or even just like if there was a delay between noticing a problem, I can see on the footage when something was reading on an instrument a certain way. It's like that took me a minute to notice. You can actually time it out, right? As opposed to try to remember it like, yeah, I wonder how long that was the problem for. So debriefing is what it's been all about for me. Looking back at the footage, it's really mostly about that. And that's what the channel has been about, is just sharing my own kind of personal debriefs and training moments. I've just been lucky that the channel has opened up a lot of opportunities to do things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's very cool. So I think that's kind of it. We kind of got the gambit there. Looking back, both recording and the live action, what would you have done different? What advice would you have given yourself back in the beginning, if you could?
I can give myself advice. Would have been maybe don't base your brand on a joke mustache. Because this whole thing was like, you guys do Movember, you know that thing, the charity thing? Yeah. So I had the Movember chops. They're not even big right now, but I had them really big and jokey in Movember, and then I went out with a bunch of buddies in like late December because I still had it on because it was funny, and I was jamming on the idea of doing a YouTube channel. And I'm hanging out with a lot of artists and film people, and my buddy at that dinner was like, if you're going to do a YouTube channel, you have to put the you in YouTube. You got to brand it based on you. And I know you like flying, and I know you like drumming, and you're always working on your drum chops, like practicing. So it's like this natural thing. Just call it flight chops. You're always practicing. You got the chops. Boom. So in one night, we had this brand designed, and it was kind of a joke, honestly. So I kind of got stuck with a brand that was a joke. That might be part of why it works. It's memorable. Some people don't get it, and they say, you have the stupidest mustache I've ever seen. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. I mean, what do you want me to say? Like, yeah, it was a joke. So I'm kind of stuck with it. Honestly, though, I don't really regret anything else I did. I really, I showed the vulnerability. I show mistakes. I show awkward moments. It's a lot of it. I mean, it's definitely not cool a lot of the time. Like, I'm not acting like a cool pilot. I'm showing moments of weakness or learning things and things that most pilots might want to hide or not talk about, or they'll talk about privately over a beer with like one guy. I'm doing it with like 100,000 people at a time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got nothing to prove. I just want to be a safe pilot and learn and grow. And I'm never going to be like a full-time professional pilot. That's not what I do. So I just want to be the best sort of weekend warrior that I can be. And I think, the channel, honestly, I don't regret it. I wouldn't change anything about how it went, really.
Well, that's good. That what's if you could pick a series or channel, finale for FlightChops, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I am trying to get the Spitfire checkout. That's what I'm working toward. I don't think it'll be over when I do that, but to achieve that would have literally been achieving a childhood dream. And I don't want to just go for a ride. Like, I want to show up prepared with enough Harvard time. That's kind of a good stepping stone airplane to get into the Spitfire and get the checkout. I don't know if I'd want a solo one just because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't kill myself in it, but I bet I could bend it. So I don't want to break an air, you know what I mean? So I would like to have in my logbook saying that I'm Spitfire qualified, so full on checked out. I mean, maybe I would solo, but we'll see. I guess down the road I might be at that point, but if tomorrow someone offered me Spitfire training, I'd be like, I'm probably ready to start. I still would like to get another 20, 30 hours in Harvard before I do it, but anyway, that's what I'm working toward. But otherwise, it's just like there's so many different stories to tell in aviation, I don't think there's any end in sight.
Thanks, Mr. Chops, for joining us on this Saturday. Thank you for helping me out from day one with Plane Savers and everything like that. Yeah. And I'm watching and learning with your videos, and of course, everybody should be subscribed to you for sure. Your honesty is the coolest part about you. you know, as we all know, pilots with the Ray-Bans and the shirt that doesn't have mustard stains on it is kind of the image. The pilot image of you know, the clean cut is.
Well, it's the coolest. You know, you drop your pilot license at the bar, and you know, it's a pretty cool thing to use for cool factor. But I think it's cool enough just to fly. I don't need to act cool because of it. You know what I mean? Like I'm always gonna. You can kill yourself real quick if you're not smart. You know, and it's easy to suddenly find yourself in a position where you're behind it. So I'm humble. I want to learn from everybody around me, and share whatever I can to help others out. But I'm not cocky about like, I mean, that's why when you said you want to talk about the path for Warbirds, like, I'll tell you my personal path, but I don't want to proclaim to be any kind of expert.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
I don't think anyone's an expert. Like, especially with DC-3s, the one thing I learned, especially I go in places like Oshkosh and stuff like that, is that people like I've grown up with are probably legitimate DC-3 experts. Yeah. And they're just blown away by just a DC-3 shows up and they're like, what the heck mod is that? I've never heard of it, never seen it, and that kind of stuff. And or even models of DC-3s and stuff like that. They're like, being 75 years old, the aircrafts are highly different. Imagine like 10 brothers that are now 75, all their different life experiences and scars and, you know, bionic knees. And
yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But, okay, I think that's great. That's a great Sunday episode for me. I think everybody would enjoy that. Yeah.
So let me know if you need any help with anything else, but right on, buddy.
Awesome, cool. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, see you later.
Fly safe. Bye. Okay, everybody, that was such a fun interview with Steve, aka FlightChops. If you haven't, you have to go over check out his channel. I'm going to provide the links in the description of the 3 Harvard videos, starting from scratch to his first solo. Check them out if you got some time this Saturday, Sunday, on the weekend, or whatever time in the future you're watching this video. Check out FlightChops. Thank you again, Steve, for taking your time out. And thank you for letting me use the footage. So any of the footage that you see is from Steve's channel. So if it's out of context or edited weird, blame me. It's my fault. But thank you, Steve, for letting me use the footage. And a little surprise for you. Look, there's a radial de Havilland Beaver there on skis. I think that's AvGeeks Air getting ready to do some flight tours. So if you want to come fly in a radial Beaver, that's a free little publicity for AvGeeks. And yeah, so enjoy your Saturday night, be safe, and we'll see you tomorrow, Sunday live stream, again as always around 2 p.m. Mountain Time, so do your math conversion there. And yeah, so have fun, be safe, and we'll see you very, very soon. Bye.